Lindsay Masland is the Director of Transformative Learning, Teaching and Learning at Appalachian State University, where she's also works as a professor of psychology. Lindsay is a consulting editor of 2 journals that focus on scholarship of teaching and learning. She directs a national teaching conference, and she is a recipient of the National Institutional Teaching Award. Lindsay holds a BA and an MA in experimental psychology from Wake Forest University and a PhD in educational psychology with a concentration in statistics from the University of Georgia. Her teaching and research interests lie in the intersection of student engagement, effective teaching practices, and inclusive excellence, and her passion is to help educators make sound pedagogical choices that lead to transformative educational experience for many types of students they have in their classrooms. She's also interested in positionality of teachers in higher education, including the sociality and systematic pressure to conspire to devalue the role of teaching and learning in academia. In short, she is enthusiastic for equitable, transformative, and liberatory experience for all who endeavor to teach and learn in higher ed. Let's welcome Lindsay.
Hello, everyone. It is so great to be here. So I'm coming to you from Appalachian State University, which is not over here. It was about a 4.5-hour flight, and so Appalachian State University is in the western mountains of North Carolina. It's also about 20 degrees cooler than it is right here, so getting off that plane was a shock, but it is also very beautiful, and so I'm so excited to be coming here for the first time and also to be meeting 500, hopefully new friends and kind of compatriots in this work. And so you see today I'm going to be talking about kind of the opposite of what this entire conference is about. Oops. But I think we'll be able to kind of weave it all in together. So to start things out, a couple of pieces of information to know about how this next hour and 15 minutes is going to go. So it does end at 10:45, so if you need that information to know when to kind of get up, if you need a biology break or something cool, if you're the kind of person that needs to stand around the perimeter, you can't sit for a real long time, it will not throw me off. In fact, when I was interviewing for my assistant professor of psychology position, there was somebody in the background who was doing like karate forms the whole time. So if I could do that at my interview, right out of my PhD, you cannot throw me off. All right, a couple of other things. We're going to have some interactive portions, some polls and things where I'm going to get your thoughts up on the screen, and that does require a device. So 2 things about that. You can choose to be a conscientious objector in the technology, that is fine. Or if you want to participate, you're going to want either like your phone, because I'm going to have QR codes. I'm also going to give you a website address that you can use, just FYI, that is coming. Other things too, if you need to know that we are going to have some kind of turn and talk to your neighbor type things, if you need to mentally prepare for that. And also table shares where you maybe talk with everybody at your table. So those things are coming. Also, 2 sets of resources for you. If you are somebody who really needs to be in the slides right now, either because of accessibility reasons or you just need them, you can go ahead and snap this. You may have to walk closer. However, I'm going to show this slide again at the end. And I can tell you, I don't think you need the slides unless you do for accessibility purposes personally. That's totally fine. And then there's also a worksheet, which we probably won't get to, but it's something you can use for further learning. Again, I will show this at the end, but I wanted to be able to put it up here just in case somebody needs it right now. Can I go ahead and advance, or are people still trying to snap? I think I see the devices down. All right, cool. Okay, so we are going to start as we intend to go on and be interactive with each other. So what I would love for you to do at your table is to turn to somebody you're sitting next to and say the following. Hi, my name is, and today I am, All right, so whatever kind of emotion word, adjective word, however you are showing up, there is no wrong answer, but go ahead and take a minute to introduce yourself to the people around you with this sentence. Oh, it's loud. I hear a lot of laughter in the room, which is great. Y'all just want to keep talking. Come back. I normally have a chime that I ring. Didn't bring it. All right, here's what I want you to do now, is so that we can kind of share with each other beyond the table that you were at. We are going to answer this exact question into a poll everywhere question. I'm actually going to advance the slide one so you can see this a little larger. So you either want to snap this QR code, let me get out of the way, or you can open up a browser tab, type in pollev.com/mylastname. Lastly, you can use texting. This will not text me, it texts the cloud. All right, and so you can send a text to 37607, it's my last name, and then you should get in. It may not be showing anything because I need to go back to the other slide, but I wanted to give some people an opportunity to see it when the font is much larger. But I'm going to move it back here. Same information. All right, folks are already in there. What is one word that represents how you are showing up today? I'm going to ask, I need my friend in the back, my tech friend in the back, to actually mouse over the slide. Can you do that? And do you see something towards the bottom that says instructions or responses? Yeah, there we go. Click on responses. All right, so it's going to bounce around as you all do this. Oh, we got some emojis. I love it. So we're mostly excited. It kind of feels like we're at like a rave or something the way it's doing this. Whoa. But, tired. Tired's real big. Tired's big. All right. And it'll keep doing that as people keep answering. But excited, tired, happy, and curious. Those are the big ones I'm seeing. Excited, tired, exhausted, and stressed are starting to crank up a little bit. All right. So, the title of this talk is In Defense of Teacher-Centered Teaching. So we better start this thing by centering us in our real experience, which apparently is excited, tired, and exhausted. Fine. We got to work from where we are going. Well, I'll answer this question for you, all right? My name, is, back up. There I am. It's Lindsay Masland, and my word was exhausted. Right? So it sounds like I am among friends. We also heard a few minutes ago when the certificates were given out, some exhaustion. But the reason that I am exhausted and that why multiple times during the last year I have looked like this, it's a little different than how I look up here probably, is because we've gone through a lot the last few years, right? We're still going through it, but we have gone through a lot, and it's made me very tired. I don't know about you all. We see this in the higher ed news right here, something from the Chronicle. We're seeing a stunning level of student disconnection. Students are checked out, stressed out, and unsure of their future. Anybody seeing this? Okay, yeah, right? We're also hearing that prospective college students, so they are not even here yet, are saying they feel unprepared to come to us. And then, in fact, when they get here, we're like, oh, yes, you are unprepared. That's right. That was an accurate self-reflection, a good metacognition there, right? It's true, though. They are so different than they were before. Also, we're seeing, this headline is kind of my favorite one, teaching in an age of militant apathy. Right? So they're not just bored and checked out, but they are militantly bored, right? It's interesting that these are the phrases we're using to describe our job. And it's not just our students, but it's us too, the great faculty disengagement. So we're not necessarily leaving in droves, but we are pulling away or changing the way we think about this job. So of course, we are exhausted. It makes me feel like this, and apologies to my daughter in the foreground and son in the background. They are much older than this now, but this picture is so funny to me because she's probably, 6 years old there. She's holding a delightful ice cream cone that has sprinkles on it. She should be pumped as a 6-year-old holding that. And yet she's a little skeptical about what's going on here. That's exactly how I feel about teaching right now. Right? This is the thing that I love to do the most. We heard in the opening remarks about how important it is and the role we play in student success and the role we play in creating the world we wish to live in. We know that's true, and yet this face, because it's like, what is going on right now? So today what I'm going to try to do is help to give you a kind of mental model, heuristic, decision-making guide, what have you, for thinking through your teaching choices, because I feel this way for sure. Here's a quote from Paulo Freire, who says, "What the educator does in teaching is make it possible for the students to become themselves." And so this is in contrast to saying we're just going to pump them full of knowledge. Now maybe the themselves they're becoming is the next amazing chemist, or the next amazing friend, or they are learning things about career and technical education. They are becoming the next audiologist, right? They are becoming whatever the best version of themselves is. I love this idea. It also makes me feel like this. Like, wait, you want me to do that on top of everything else you've already asked me to do as a faculty or staff member, instructor? You want me to do that? I mean, I do want to do that. It's true. But what I think our task is now, at this time in our lives, is to figure out how we can do that, but in a sustainable way, in a way that doesn't run us out. Because I'll admit that sometimes it feels like the messaging we get from administrators, and I can say this because I'm an administrator on my campus, but the messaging we get from administrators is that we are unlimited resources, right? Do more with less. I need more, I need to always see growth, those kinds of things. But we're people, we are limited resources. Just like clean air and water and energy sources, we actually will run out. And in fact, it's the type of people who are sitting here in this room who don't really have to give up summer for another week and a half yet, have chosen to come sit here to talk about this kind of stuff. You all are the ones who are going to run yourselves out first, probably, because you are so student-centered, because you are so committed to helping students become the best version of themselves. I like to draw on this wisdom from Parker Palmer, who's kind of known as the teacher's teacher. Here's two quotations from him that I think, although he wrote this a long time ago, really speaks to what we are going through right now. So first quotation, "As I teach, I project the condition of my soul onto my students, my subject, our way of being together." And even if the soul language is not like in your daily lexicon, I think the idea works, right? However I show up, and we apparently showed up as excited, happy, curious, stressed, and tired, right? We are going to project that on to the environments that we show up to, whether we want to or not. It's just a fact. So if we are exhausted, that's going to affect our teaching. Second quote from Parker Palmer, "Good teaching cannot be reduced to technique. Good teaching comes from the identity and integrity of the teacher." And I always hesitate to put this one up here because the folks at ETE are like, no, wait, good teaching can be reduced to technique. Come do our learning circles. Come do our workshops. Come get our certificates to learn our techniques. However, I don't think that's enough. And what Parker Palmer is saying in here, when he uses that word integrity, he's not meaning like morality or ethics or any of that kind of stuff. He's using integrity to mean people who are like whole people. People whose actions are in line with their values, right? People who are authentic and intentional. That's what he means by integrity, integrated. And so if we are having to do things in our classroom that are not reflective of what we are, who we are, what we care about, our greatest values, then we are going to exhaust ourselves faster. So it's kind of ironic, because if we teach in ways that don't support our identity and integrity, not the students, our identity and integrity, we're actually going to be worse at our jobs. Even when we're trying to do student-centered practices, it means we won't be effective. So those of us who are like, I am going to be so student-centered, you are just not going to believe it. If we don't ever think about ourselves, our identity, our integrity, we're going to run out. And the people like us who do deeply care about student success and being student-centered will no longer be available to fill that role. So we have to figure out a way to do this that does not damage our identity and integrity. So the point I'm trying to make today, and that we will explore together when we start thinking about our actual in-the-classroom teaching practices, is this idea that student-centered teaching cannot mean teacher irrelevant. I think a lot of the times when we look at workshops and things like that, and we're focusing on these very specific pedagogical practices and tweaks that we make, we never talk about ourselves. We're just talking about, I'm going to do this for the students, I'm going to do this for the students, as if we're not even in the room. But we are in the room, and so we need to make ourselves relevant. to be the best teachers that we can be. Now here's the kind of funny thing, so this is a screenshot, my apologies Travis, of an email from Travis when we were kind of figuring out, okay, I'm gonna come hang out with you all, and so I agreed to that over a year ago, and then a few months ago he said we gotta get the title and the abstract, and he said, so this is what we're doing, we need a session on student-centered approaches. And I was like, okay, because I don't really do that. But in fact, I want to read to you my response to him that kind of explains why I'm still allowed to be doing the session I'm doing. All right, so I said, well, so here's the title of the talk I'm thinking of, and it's the exact opposite of what you have asked for. And I said, but even if some version of that doesn't work for y'all, sorry, I'm from the South, y'all, if that doesn't work for y'all, I have to say that the content that's coming out of my brain, heart, and body these days is exactly that title. It's about teaching in a student-centered way that doesn't exhaust the teachers, who are the ones who have to craft these student-centered approaches. Because I know we're all a little freaked out by the students who are showing up in our classes these days. In comparison to the students we were, in comparison to the students of 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, they are a totally different breed. But what I'm seeing as the response or intervention to this is to double down on student-centeredness. And that's what I'm personally worried about. That if we double down on student-centeredness without simultaneously doubling down on ourselves, we are headed for even more burnout, disengagement, quiet quitting, or whatever you want to call it. So whatever I talk about on this stage, it needs to somehow be anchored in that, or it won't be authentic to me. And being authentic to me is, I think, the whole reason people are interested in what I have to say. And so Travis writes back and he goes, yes, do that. So I was like, okay. So we have it. We're going to work it out. But my apologies. So let's start thinking about this. Let's start figuring out how to center ourselves. We're going to make this teacher-centered with the understanding that in the long run, being teacher-centered is actually going to pan out for ourselves and our students. Now, wait, let's back up here. All of that might have felt a little touchy-feely for some of you. It might have been a little too, like, inspirational platitudes. So if you're that person, look, I have math and numbers now, okay? You made it through the cheesy part, all right? And now those of you who are like, no, why did you put math and numbers up there? It's okay. I've been teaching graduate statistics to students who hate math for 13 years. So we can make it work. All right, so what we are looking at here is a path model, just another word for a model, that is representing some relationships between some teaching stuff and some student stuff. And this study was done a few years ago, and basically what the folks were trying to figure out is, why is it that some professors, some instructors, select effective teaching practices and other ones select less effective teaching practices? So they were not trying to study student-centeredness or teacher-centeredness or any of that. That's kind of what came out. So I'm going to walk you through their findings because they have really interesting implications if we are trying to teach with ourselves in the center. All right, so I'm going to cover up what we don't need to look at. So the way you read these kinds of path models or structural equation models is you start kind of on the right side. That's the stuff we're trying to predict or explain or understand. And so these researchers comb through the scholarly teaching literature to find some major things that if you do these things, they connect to student success. If you do these things, more learning happens. So that's not what they found out in this study. They just they did a lit review to find those out. Okay, so we see 4 things. They're not that surprising, but they are the kinds of things that you would learn a lot about when you work with the ETE, right? So instructional clarity, people who are super clear and transparent about what they're teaching and how the students are supposed to engage in the course. You do that, students are more successful. Higher order learning, so we're not only focusing on these low levels of remembering and regurgitating, but can we analyze, can we apply, can we be creative? When instructors do that, they are more likely to have students who are successful. Instructors who make their students be reflective and integrative, meaning how does this unit connect to the last unit? How does this course relate to other courses in your major or program of study? And reflecting on, in a kind of metacognitive way, about their learning process. That seems to help. And in fact, I see that we have several sessions coming later today about metacognition and reflection. All right, and then much to our students' dismay, collaborative learning also seems to increase their own learning. I know they hate group work, but look, the science says so. All right, so we were trying to understand, or not we, I didn't do this research, these researchers were trying to understand which instructors do these 4 types of things. How are they, what are they motivated by? And so they looked into 3 types of motivation. And we're going to start with the one on the bottom and work our way up. So first they asked, are professors and instructors who are externally motivated by things, do they teach effectively? So professors who are, for example, changing their teaching because they want to get higher student evaluations, changing their teaching because they know somebody is going to come do a peer review of them, changing their teaching because they are hoping to get some teaching award, they're changing their teaching just to get tenure. Those are all externally motivated reasons. Now, if you know anything about path analysis, you know that there has to be a line between 2 things for it to predict. And right, we see that the professors who are externally motivated, it doesn't predict any of these student-centered, student-effective practices. So we don't want to do that one, all right? Next one, introjected motivation. Introjected motivation is when you teach out of guilt and shame. Yeah, that one's fun. But this is what I mean. Let's say you go to a learning circle that was put on by the ETE and you learn about some cool new things. You're not really that bought into them, but you're like, but it says it's good for students, so I should probably do it, right? It's that kind of thing, like I don't want to do this, but my chair is expecting me to do this, I'm gonna do it. All right, now we see a couple of lines starting to pop up. It is true that folks who have that introjected sense of motivation do make some solid teaching choices. But the only one that has lines to all 4 is this thing at the top called autonomous motivation. Now, when you hear that word, you're probably thinking autonomy, okay, that means I get to make my own choices. And autonomous motivation is, autonomy is really only one piece of that, or agency is one piece of that. Really, people who are autonomously motivated are experiencing that sense of integrity that we heard Parker Palmer talk about on a previous slide. People who are autonomously motivated feel like the choices they're making in their classroom come out of who they are, what they value, what they are trying to accomplish. So everything is attentional, aligned, and authentic. It's the people who make teaching choices based on their own values are the ones who do these 4 things on the end, which is kind of ironic because clearly this study was supposed to be about student-centeredness. Yet I think the outcome was actually the people who are really aware of themselves, the instructors, and making choices that meet their needs actually ends up working out really well for the students in the long run. Interesting. Now, for those of you who are like, please just show me the left-hand side, we're not going to talk about it. But those of you who are, I don't know if we still have any administrators in the room, we can do a whole workshop for you on the left-hand side of this, which is if you want autonomous faculty and instructors, you have to provide these things on the left-hand side. But I want us to focus in, though, on this autonomous motivation because it predicts so much about good teaching practices. And so essentially what we're talking about here is thinking about why we do what we do. And so I'm wondering, like now that you're kind of consuming this information, what do you think your autonomous motivation is? Why are you doing this? And not in like a snarky way, I need a paycheck, et cetera. We all need that. But I don't think we would choose this career and stay in this career if we did not have some deeper kind of purpose connected to why we keep showing up and doing this really hard work. Now, some of you, when I put this question before you, you might be like, oh, yes, I know that. I have my purpose statement. I have my personal mission statement. But some of you might be thinking, what? I never put feelings in my math class or whatever. And remember, I teach statistics, and this person teaches statistics, so it can be done. But I want to give you some prompts to help you start thinking about this. This is new thinking to you. All right, so we're going to spend about 3 minutes independently, silently brainstorming one or more of these prompts. So here's the first one. I want you to imagine that in May, your chair or your boss or whoever you want to be impressing, insert that noun there, right, receives an email praising you for the amazing job that you have done, specifically in your teaching. We're not talking about scholarship or creative acts or anything like that, but specifically for your teaching. So we're going to pretend like that happens. My first question for you to think about is who's actually writing that email to your chair? Is it your students? Is it your colleague who's in the office next door and they see how hard you work? Is it actually the chair who's sending a message on to the provost on your behalf or something like that? So who is going to be bragging on you. What exactly do you hope they put in there? What pieces of your teaching, what aspects of the way you design your learning experiences for your students, exactly what it is are they saying? I'm hoping it's not something like, I really love that pink jacket you always wear, right? That there's something kind of meaty. And I only bring that up because my very first year of teaching in my tenure track job, I get back those student evaluations, and multiple students talked about loving my purple pants that I wore. So like, not that. I was like, thank you, but also no thank you. So what do you hope that you're praised for other than your wardrobe? And then lastly, what adjectives do you hope somebody's using to describe you in this? What are those adjectives they're using to describe you in your teaching? Now, if that is also too touchy-feely and you're like, I don't want to think like that, here's another angle to get in altogether. This one's a little snarky, but what are teaching choices that other people make that really frustrate you, right? When you see something on somebody's syllabus and you're like, what? Like, I can't, or you happen to walk by their class and you're like, oh, they're doing that thing again, right? Any of those kinds of things where you're like, that gives you a clue. The things that really make you angry in other people's teaching tell you something about what you value in the classroom. So we really, truly are going to go 3 minutes on this. And so I want you to, if you need to write, if you need to type, challenge yourself to not check your email, but to actually think through this. 3 minutes. Alrighty, 3 minutes is up. So don't worry, I'm not going to make you share that with your neighbors, whatever you just thought of, because it can feel a little uncomfortable to think about, here's this amazing letter that's going to be written on my behalf. But the reason I wanted you to kind of have some of those thoughts is to see whether or not that reflection might give you some clues to what I'm calling your pedagogical values. Meaning, if you think about what you want to be known for or praised for, it gives you some clues to what you value in teaching and learning environments. And so here I have a list of a bunch of different possible values. There are many other values out there. Values lists can be hundreds and hundreds of words long, but I've just selected ones that I've frequently seen in these kinds of contexts. And I'm wondering, do any of these feel like you? Like, yes, I am trying to promote critical thinking. Yes, I am trying to promote empowerment in my classes. Things like that. So look at it for a minute. If there is one or more that you really like, you might want to write it down so you can kind of take that with you. But in a minute, I am going to ask you again on Poll Everywhere to share anonymously one of these values. So at a minimum, pick one that you are going to put into that poll. I want you to look at it. Of course, if your values aren't up here and you have different nouns or adjectives that you want to put in there, totally fine. Make sure you find one you like. Wait, I'm going to look and see which ones I want. And in fact, if you want to know how cheesy I truly am, I actually have my pedagogical values like on my wrist here, like Taylor Swift friendship style bracelet. So later during the conference, if you want to come up to me and see which ones I have on my wrist. But I do have them there to keep me rooted in these ideas and to honestly give me permission to say no to all sorts of things because they do not match these things. I'm going to help you to do that in a minute too. But first, all right, let's see what your values are. So what you want to do is just get back into that browser you were in before. It should have switched, should have switched questions, or go back into that text and type in the value word. Now, if it's more than one word that you're putting in there, you must put a hyphen or it's going to separate the words out and it won't make sense. They'll be by themselves in that kind of wordle. All right? All right, and my tech friend in the back, could you do the same thing you did before? Yep, and we'll see them start popping up. All right, now, what I have done here is something in psychology we call priming, because the two words I said, empowerment and critical thinking, are very large on the screen. And so who knows whether or not you would have all truly said that if I hadn't said those. But we can see them bouncing around. We want to either promote in our students or we want to model ourselves empowerment, passion, critical thinking, enthusiasm, authenticity. I'm trying to see the bigger ones because the bigger ones mean more people said that. And I know it's bouncing around a ton. Empowerment, oh, okay, stopping for a minute. Oh, empowerment, enthusiasm, critical thinking. I've got to write these down. So I love doing this activity, and I've done it in lots of different rooms, and it just gives me goosebumps to know that I'm in a room with 500 people who really care about empowerment, love of learning, and enthusiasm for their students. Never once has anybody put something up here that's like authoritarianism, right? Like, that is just not the thing that shows up there. It is never like gatekeeping and keeping people out of my discipline who don't deserve to be there. Like, there's no word that feels like any of that. It's all these things like empowerment and critical thinking and enthusiasm, empathy, courage, passion, right? All of these wonderful words that are really encouraging, and that I think our students would be excited to know that's what you care about for them. That's kind of delightful, right? So here's the idea for me, is that your pedagogical values, that word or words, is essentially the key to your autonomous motivation. If you can make teaching choices that reflect whatever value words you just put in there, you are going to be more likely to make teaching choices that ironically end up being student-centered. Even though it wasn't actually about them, it actually becomes about them based on the research. I like to use this statement myself, make purpose or your values your bouncer. This statement came from a book called The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker, which is not about teaching or anything like that. It's actually about how to throw dinner parties, but also not about that. You know, it's one of those books that's ostensibly about one thing, and then you're like, wait a minute, this is about some other stuff. And in that book, though, when she's talking about dinner parties or conferences or any kind of place where you're going to gather people together, you're going to take their time and make them come to a place to do a thing, exactly what you're doing right now. What she says is, do not start with things like the menu. Do not start with how many people are coming in or who. Do not start with how are we going to set up all these tables and chairs and things. Start with the purpose. Why are we asking people to take time out of their lives to come together for this? All right, and so that helps you then make decisions about what are the activities we're going to do, how should people be seated based on the purpose. Same idea with values and teaching, that if your value is empowerment or critical thinking or enthusiasm or passion, then you would want to design your classes to enable those things and to gleefully say no to choices that do not enable those things. We cannot be saying yes to everything. Uh-oh. There we go. So your just took a minute there. So your values will become that bouncer, right? And truly a bouncer, like in a nightclub, standing there deciding who gets in and who does not get in. And that's why I have them on my wrist, to remind me, no, Lindsay, you don't have to do that, because that is not connected to whatever my values are. So now what I'd like you to do is do a turn and talk. So turn to maybe a different neighbor than you introduced yourself to if you have lots of people at your table, or maybe the same. And I'd love for you, to the extent that you feel comfortable, to share one of your values, one thing that resonates with you. And then you two to talk together about kind of teaching choices that might match up to that. So if you were somebody who said, well, empowerment's my value, and one way that I kind of do that in my classes is I use this activity, or I have this in my syllabus, or I have this on my Canvas page, or whatever, this assignment, this policy, something like that. So let's take a few minutes to talk about some of our values and some of our practices that might connect. I know that it's mean to cut off discussions like this, especially if you have done this kind of thinking before, because you usually get kind of amped up, because you're like, oh yes, and this is why I do this, and you talk about the choices you've made that are kind of important to you. But I encourage you to keep thinking about that kind of reasoning. So what we're starting to kind of build here is a decision-making framework that we can use as instructors when we're trying to decide what to include and not include in our teaching. And that it's not only about trying to be student-centered, but that we really need to be thinking about how our pedagogical values overlap. So here's a perfect example, and I'll go into more examples of my own teaching later, but I'll go ahead and tell you that one of the things on my wrist is belongingness. And it is really important to me in my classrooms, but also just in my interactions with people, that they feel like they matter where they are, right, that they belong. And so I've always known that was one of my values once I kind of thought about this. And then one day I was going through, it's about this time of the year, where I'm like editing my syllabus for next semester, and I'm using a syllabus that I've been using for many, many years and just tweaking it each time. And I'm like, you know what, I'm going to read the whole thing top to bottom. I haven't done that in a few years. And I get to a section that has a bunch of all capital letters in it. And it was like, you will not do da-da-da-da-da. And I was like, me? I had that in my, and I had already been giving like a talk like this, and knowing that my value is belongingness, but oh my goodness, yelling at my students in all capital letters in the syllabus is not going to make people feel belong and like warm and fuzzy. So that's a perfect example of how once you get really clear about your values, you can kind of go through stuff you already have on hand, your syllabus, your Canvas course, the directions for an assignment or a test, and be like, okay, are my students going to get this feeling of my values after they experience this, or are they going to think I value something else? And do I need to make some changes? The other thing I want to point out about this graphic is, yes, I'm basically talking about that overlap between the green and the purple right now, making choices there. Also notice how much of the purple is not overlapping with your values. Meaning there's a world of completely defensible, evidence-based, student-centered, inclusive teaching tactics that are available for you that you will not choose. And that is fine. So today you're going to go to a bunch of different sessions, you're going to hear all these cool ideas, and you might have this pressure, that introjected motivation to like, I got to put all this in my class for a week and a half from now. No, but what you can do is say, what choices can I make in that overlap, and just let the other ones in the saturated purple be for now. Ideally, over time, as you kind of think more deeply about your teaching, these circles will become closer, and you'll figure out ways to do your version of lots of different student-centered teaching approaches that still reflect your values. So this is not a blank check, because also notice how much of the orange doesn't overlap with the purple. Right? There are plenty of things I might value, like I might value like not having to show up to teach the class because I'd like to hang out, right? That's not true, but I'm just saying that could be a thing, like I value chilling out, all right? That's not going to get our students where they need to be. So it's not a blank check, but it does let you ground and root your decisions in values. Now notice this is a 3-circle Venn diagram, and we have only talked about 2 of them. There's one other circle that we need to be rooting our teaching choices in, and that is our context. Okay? So not all of us can make the same kinds of choices as each other, even if we happen to have identical pedagogical values, because we are all different people teaching different courses, carrying different life experiences. So what I'm talking about when I say context, I've got a bunch of things that connect to your job and your institution. For example, the precarity of your job. So some of you in this room are on tenure track, or you're tenured, or you made it all the way through, you're full professor, and I'm in that category. And so those of us who are full professors have a lot of leeway to kind of teach outside the box, right? Experiment with things and not worry or care about what other people are going to say. Some of you, though, are on contracts that you have to re-sign constantly. And so you don't have the level of safety to try some of these things you might want to try. Instead of feeling guilty about that, because we're not trying to do introjected motivation, just own it. It is a truism of your context, and it constrains which choices you can make. That's fine. We've got other things too, like different things work better in some domains than others. We've got these expectations of our department. Maybe there's norms in our department of how you should teach, how you should assess, the types of tests and assignments you should give. Maybe we've got accreditation requirements. Some of you probably teach in programs where some of your learning objectives are handed down to you. And so you have to kind of build around that. That constrains your choices that you could make. Some of you teach in these seated, whatever word you use for it, seated, face-to-face, on location, all of those words that we've created since the pandemic began. Some of you teach with bodies in the room. Some of you teach with bodies behind screens, right? That is going to affect the choices you can make. If it's your first time teaching a course, you're going to feel differently than if you've taught it 50 times. It's just true. It's not something to be guilty about. It's a fact. There's another side of our context, too, which is our socio-demographic identities and lived experiences that we carry. Some of these choices on paper are going to look the same, but if they happen in a body that looks like mine versus in a body that looks like Travis's, for example, it will be experienced by the students differently, even if we're literally teaching identically the same. And that's true about gender expression, race, ethnicity, folks who speak English as a second or other language. There's plenty of research there, and these might be international faculty who do the same teaching that I do, somebody who is native to the United States, and yet it is interpreted differently because of the bodies that we inhabit, the way that we sound and speak. So I want to really encourage you to think about these things because they really do affect the choices you can make. And the field that studies this stuff, the field that I'm in and the folks in the ETE are in, are starting to think about this. Here's two things from the Chronicle. The little subline there on the first one is advocates are asking teachers to cede authority to students, to let students make decisions in the classroom. But what if you're a faculty member of color or you're an adjunct without much authority to share in the first place, right? It's a very different ask to be super student-centered and let students make choices in your class if you are somebody like me who is white and tenured. And then uneven burden of identity, professors being asked to accommodate students, but that's not the same ask for everyone. So maybe you want to be super flexible for your students, but your context is such that you have parenting responsibilities. Maybe you have care responsibilities for an elder adult. Maybe you yourself have visible or invisible disabilities, and so it makes it harder for you to be as flexible as the person in the office next to you. Let's not carry shame about that. Let's say that that is true, and that is informing the teaching decisions that I make. And if you don't want to just, rely on things from like the Chronicle and that kind of pop culture approach to higher ed, we've got some actual research on this. This is one of those great papers where they tell you the entire conclusion in the title. So, it's like, oh, I didn't have to read that, okay. So dancing backwards in high heels, female professors experience more work demands and special favor requests, particularly from academically entitled students. And so if you do actually read the paper, it seems that they found people with a feminine gender expression, and they didn't only do binary gender in this study, but people with a feminine gender expression were more likely to get requests for like extensions, to turn in work late. Hey, will you look at this paper before I turn it in, kind of thing. Feminine instructors were on the receiving of that much more than folks with other kind of gender presentations. And so you can see how that matters. Maybe we don't want it to matter, but we have plenty of research that shows that it's true. Here's another example here. I see that we have multiple ungrading sessions happening today. Yay, I'm an ungrader as well, so I'd love to talk to you about that. If you're not familiar with that, it's fine. This is not an ungrading session. But it is just an alternative approach to assessing that a lot of us are exploring that kind of gets rid of letter grades and points. But I'm bringing it up because here is an essay that is written by Dr. McLeod at Grand Valley State University. She does this, but she talks about how she needs to keep receipts for everything that she does that's kind of out of the box, because she knows that her colleagues might think, oh, the reason you're not putting grades on papers is because you're not competent enough to render grades. And she, as a woman of color, is going to feel that messaging differently than somebody who's inhabiting a different body. She feels like she has to really keep notes on everything she's doing and really prepare herself for the student evaluations that are going to come, for the promotion and tenure discussions that are going to happen, because her context is different than some of the context of her colleagues. So, these are the three pieces that we need to be anchoring ourselves in, and it's intentional that values and context, the two things that belong to us uniquely, are the bottom level, right? Those are the foundation. And then once we understand what we care about and the situation that we find ourselves in, then we can figure out what student-centered choices are right for us. And I hope you'll take this kind of decision-making heuristic with you throughout the day and beyond. So the idea being that we're basically creating boundaries for ourselves, boundaries of our context and our values. And then the student-centered decisions happen in the middle, ideally that kind of star place where all three overlap. And that we want to reduce the kinds of choices that are making that live in the external places, because it's just not going to feel as good, because it's not going to be that integrated, aligned, authentic thing that we heard from Parker Palmer. All right, so basically I want to give you this quote because I like it, because sometimes when you hear the word boundaries in higher ed, it kind of just, it feels like people are drawing a line and saying like, no, I will not do that, and we start to feel weird around people who throw boundaries. Well, at least that's what I'm starting to see. Is they're like, oh, that person has boundaries, which is really weird thing to say. We should all have boundaries. But I really like this conceptualization of boundaries coming from Prentice Hemphill, who is an embodiment practitioner. And they say boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. Now, you may feel uncomfortable with the word love in a teaching and learning conference. Fine. Although some of us, I think, do think that teaching is love work. So maybe you're fine with it. But I just love this definition because it shows how boundaries are not a bad thing. Boundaries are the way that I can hold both of us together at once and not be compromising my needs while I'm meeting yours. And so I think that's maybe the way we think about our student-centered teaching, is the way I can care about me and you at the same time. So these are the questions I'd like you to ask yourself, and I will give you a moment, time in a little bit to ask yourself these kinds of questions. But I'm always asking myself, if my values are this and my context is that, then what is student-centered teaching going to be for me? And then I basically build myself a toolbox of the things that I'm going to use. And certain tools work better in certain classes than others. So I teach a wide range of courses. And some of the tools I use in the morning class I would never use in the afternoon class. It's a different context that I need to think about. I have different values that are showing up there. So we're basically trying to figure out a toolbox. And as you go throughout today and throughout any other future teaching and learning programming, I hope you think about it this way, like what's in my toolbox and what's not in my toolbox. And your toolbox does not have to look like my toolbox. Your toolbox can be very different. That's fine. In fact, maybe your toolbox has no tools and it just has a kitty cat in it. That's fine, okay, right? As long as you've done this intentional work of saying, no, the cat is in there for a reason, right? That is an integrated, authentic, aligned approach to my teaching. The cat is in there for a reason. That is fine. Right? You got to figure out what your toolbox is. I also saw this once. Interestingly, this was on an Instagram for folks with ADHD, but I think it applies here. It said, there are no rules. If a strategy or tool doesn't work for you, it doesn't mean anything about you. It's just the wrong tool. And so I like that idea because I think sometimes we do get into that introjected shame, guilt place with our teaching, instead of just realizing maybe it's not the right tool for me, but it might be the right tool for somebody else. So what I want to do now is give you some examples from my own teaching of if this is my value, then this is like a very specific choice I made or did not make. Show you some resources that will help you there. Interestingly, when I was creating this slide deck, this was the toolbox that comes up when you search toolbox in images. And I was like, that does not feel like a Lindsay toolbox. So then I went to AI and asked it to make different toolboxes for me. And the first one it made was this one. And I was like, you're not wrong, but also that is just a little like gloom and doom. And then, so I said, try again, make it again. And so then the next one, it's like launching. Now I'm like, what is happening? And then I was like, no. So then I made it a little smaller, and I was like, that's not it. Then the next one had some confetti, and I was like, ooh, okay, we're getting somewhere. The one I settled on was actually not one toolbox, but two, because I don't know if you can tell, I've got a lot of energy and a lot of ideas, so I need multiple toolboxes, one of which is exploding with pink confetti, right? So whatever your toolbox is, that's fine. I'm going to show you the ones from my a bit much toolboxes, all right? These might not be the right tools for you. But the reason I'm going to go through this is to show you how you connect values and context to teaching choices. All right? So I got to tell you about some of my values here so that you can decide whether or not I'm being a good bouncer with my values. I already mentioned one of them, belongingness. Another one that I really value and that I have the context to value is shared power with my students, so trying to have a more kind of democratic, flat structure in my classes. I couldn't have done that probably as a graduate student or a first-year assistant professor, but I can do that now, given my context. Also, joy and ease. And you might be like, what? Joy and ease is one of your class values. We'll talk about it in a minute. And then the last one is actually boundaries. I value boundaries for the reasons I talked about. You also need to know a little bit about my context in order to evaluate whether or not any of this stuff is possible or even like what you could do. So as I mentioned, and I do have tenure, I've gone through all those steps up to full professor in the psychology department, although now I'm actually full-time staff in our version of the ETE. So I went through and then I moved over so I could do this kind of work. But that's important to know because I can do a lot of way out of the box things before I get in trouble at all. Right? It's true. And so that's important because I wouldn't necessarily recommend all of you to do the things I do because you might actually get in trouble in a way that matters. All right, also important to know that the stuff that I'm going to be talking about at the time, I was teaching a 2-3 load, so 2 classes in the fall and 3 in the, in spring, yeah. And that I had between 10 and 50 people per course in these. So I teach both graduate students in statistics. I teach graduate statistics. I teach a gen ed class that's an educational psychology class with 50 people per section. And then I teach some other things that are kind of in this realm of the science of teaching and learning. So I tell you that just so that you know, okay, she's got like 50 people in a classroom at once. I haven't yet taught like a 200-person class. So that's important because if you teach that, I don't know how big classes get in the Utah State University system. How big do they get? Somebody shout. 150? It got bigger. 1,100 in this one. All right. So you will not want to do some of the things that I say here. Okay. Some of them you totally can though. But I'm saying that's an important contextual factor, is you got to be thoughtful about it. Also at Appalachian State, our expectations are such that our research, teaching, and service are more or less equal. Maybe service is a little less, but it is not down to 5%, right? So you need to know that that's kind of the norm there. I've also listed a bunch of my sociodemographic identities in the yellow there. Some of those make my job easier. Some of those make my job harder. Some of them don't affect my job at all. But I think it's important you know those things. Okay, so let's kind of focus in on belongingness, and I want you all to think first. So I've told you my value is belongingness. Based on that, what are some things, talk at your table, that I should probably do in my teaching that would be reflective of belongingness and should definitely not do? I already gave you one example of the all caps in my syllabus. But let's think of other things that would and would not support belongingness. Go ahead. So what I'm going to show you up here is just quickly a couple things that I do and don't do. Not going to go into it. I'm going to focus in on 1 or 2 of them. But if you see them and you're like, wait, what? And you want to know more about that when we get to the end, you can ask me to elaborate on some of these things. But here's a couple things I don't do. And they're not even pedagogical practices, but they are things I used to do that I stopped doing. There's actually evidence-based reasons for why you wouldn't do either of these. I'll just quickly say research in psychology shows that venting actually magnifies your emotions instead of releasing them and letting them go. So I don't do those things, but I want to tell you and show you some specific examples of things I do in order to enhance belongingness. So I really try to focus on student identities and focus on language of growth and belonging. And I saw that we have at least one session on how to do that in your syllabus coming up later on today. So that fits right in perfectly with this. But I'll show you how I do both of those 2 things, both center student identities, which I'll kind of focus on, but also the language of growth and belonging. So here's a type of assignment that I have in every class I teach, including the statistics classes, where it might seem a little bit of a bigger stretch to include identity. So this is it's a screenshot from a PowerPoint slide, but it's an assignment. So I asked the students to share in writing something that no one knows about you, and that, or at least no one in the class knows, so other people can know it, but the people in the class probably won't know it. And should be something that's going to help the class understand either you better, where you're coming from better. The important thing about this assignment is they do not put their names on it. So even I do not know what they have written. And so they go home over the weekend and they write it. I usually encourage them to type it so that I can't even figure out their handwriting by the end of the semester if they truly want it to be anonymous. They turn them all in, they check their name off on a roll when they turn it in, that's how they get credit for it. But I really, truly don't know who wrote what. And then this is what I do. Of course, I read them all, and that does help me to understand their identities, but the way that I center their identities is we begin each day of class with me reading a couple of these out loud. It's almost like our opening, like, benediction or something like that, you know, like where it's like this thing that we do every single time. And if I can somehow make it connect to what we're talking about that day, good, but sometimes you can't because somebody goes on and on about anime and Disney World, and that's fine. Great, right? But we just kind of start the class that way. We don't talk about it. We don't have commentary about it. We just start and listen to somebody's words. We give space for their words. And every year I'm always like, should I stop doing this? And they put in my student evaluations, that's the most important thing you do. And they say that because they hear a lot of times, oh my gosh, it's not just me, because maybe somebody is talking about homesickness. Somebody is talking about food insecurity. Somebody is talking about what it's like to be a student from a marginalized or underrepresented group. And then they hear that and they go, oh my gosh, somebody else in here feels that way. It also makes people tread a little lighter because they realize there's somebody in here that. And so it helps us to build community and feel a sense of belonging. Here's another example of how I center identities. This is a screenshot from my syllabus. I have a variety of syllabus types. This is my liquid syllabus. Meaning I have a Google site as a syllabus instead of a PDF. I also have a text version for accessibility. But FYI, when you look at the slides later, either because you QR code snap them or because you get them from Travis on the website, in the notes section of all of these slides, I have lots of links to all sorts of things, including my whole syllabi, all of the stuff that I'm showing you. But I'm just showing you this to see that in my syllabus, I have what are called identity safety cues, which research shows that if students resonate with any of these kinds of identities and they see them in the syllabus, they feel more welcomed and they feel a sense of belonging. Now here's the caveat. If you personally do not feel like you can support students who have any of these identities, it would be inauthentic for you to put it in your syllabus. But if you feel like you could support students with a variety of backgrounds, you can go read this later, but I have a lot of that growth mindset language in here, a lot of that expect failure and that kind of thing to set them up before they ever even come into the class, because I do send the syllabus before the week before, so that they see themselves there and they see themselves being supported. All right, I want to also talk about the joy and ease one. Because sometimes people see that one of my teaching values is ease, and they're like, oh, you're one of those professors. Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. But here's the reason why I'm focused on ease. Because part of definitely American culture, to some extent Western culture generally, has this idea of no pain, no gain. Right? We see it everywhere. We see it in athletics, but we also see it in the classroom. And so, I was socialized into that too, myself. But then I started reading some books. Here's some examples of books that I read, and recommend. How to Do Nothing, which is not actually about that. And then Rest is Resistance. And both of these come very different perspectives for questioning this idea of whether or not things should hurt to be worthwhile. Now, this is very different than the idea of desirable difficulties, which I see we have a session on that. This is, in fact, complementary with that. But I'm just really in my own life trying to question how much hard work has to feel hard versus joyful. You may have heard that and gone, definitely not doing that. But for me, that's what I'm playing with in my personal life and in my pedagogical life. So just a couple of quick examples of things that maybe I used to do on the left-hand side that I don't do anymore. I don't have any time tests anymore. I am one of those, but I used to. And then I did this kind of work of trying to become more intentional and aligned, and I got rid of things. I also changed how I mess with my deadlines and flexibility. Now, here's the thing about most values. It is possible to get carried away with them. It is possible to connect it so much and to go so far to one side of ease that you actually cause problems for yourself. I'm going to jump. We don't have time for a table talk, but I want to give you an example. So sometimes what you need is what I call an anchoring value to balance out things to make sure you don't get carried away. So to make sure I don't get carried away with this sense of ease, I need to have some boundaries and structure. Because in my class, students could confuse ease and easy, right? Doing things with a sense of ease usually connects to a sense of flow and competence, and this is difficult, but I can do it, and you really feel like in the zone or keyed in. That's what I want them to feel in my class. That is not the same thing as easy. Even though I have an ungraded class where I don't put any letters or number grades on any work, you could see how a student the first day shows up and they're like, yes, this is going to be so easy, because they see that in the syllabus. I have to counteract that. And so what I do is I have an assignment early on where they have to keep submitting that thing until they get all of it right. That makes it clear, oh wait, she's not messing around. Shoot. I thought we were going to coast in this class, but actually she has very high standards. So that's one thing I had to add in. Another thing that I do is I am very flexible with deadlines. Because I only teach up to 50 people in a section, I can handle that. I would have to be less flexible for the 1,100 in the back there, right? But you could see a situation in a class that's all about ease and that has really flexible deadlines that students do things like let their work pile up, which is not good for me because I don't want to be grading all that late work when grades are due. It's also not good for them, because if we have designed a class that's really thoughtful, you probably need to get feedback on a previous thing before you move on to the next thing. Like, we designed it that way, and if they're waiting until the week of exams to submit it, we can't have that happening either. That's not going to be very helpful. And so what I use is I use what I call best by dates with an extension request form. So I do actually have due dates, but we call them best by dates. Just like you know how on your milk and your strawberries it says best by this date, all right? And so we all know that you can usually drink the milk or eat the strawberries a little bit beyond, and it's fine. Same in my class. I almost never start grading the things the day it was due, right? It's usually maybe like a couple days later, maybe the next week when I start grading it. That's just reality. And so I can say I would prefer to have your assignments by this date. But if something in your life makes it impossible for that to happen, that's okay. We got some flexibility. And then what I ask the students to do is to complete this form, a late work explanation form. And this is hyperlinked into the thing, so you can use it as a template if it's of interest to you. But anytime something is either going to be late or has been late, they don't have to do this before it's late, which I know you might have some thoughts about, right? But they can do it. They just have to explain themselves, and explain themselves only means, yes, I am taking accountability for having been late as the student, and here is when you're going to get it. There are other blocks for them to elaborate on why they're late. I don't know about you all, but our students really want to tell us about their dramatic lives. And so sometimes I just put a space there. It's an optional question in the Google form. If you need to tell me about your kitty, it's fine, but you also don't have to tell me about your kitty cat in order to do this. Now you might be thinking, oh my gosh, that's going to be a nightmare, because then she has to manage a bunch of alternative new due dates that people have proposed. Here's the secret. I don't pay attention to this form. Which might be like, what? The whole point is not for me to be like, you said you were turning in on Monday, where is it? I don't have time for that, right? But there's something psychologically about the fact that somebody has filled out a form and has promised me it will be by this date that makes them more likely to actually do it. So all I do when I get a new entry into the form is I say, I send them a template email that I have saved. Thank you, I received your thing. Looking forward to receiving it according to your plan. Whatever. And I will say, like, I didn't mean to do that. So here's what happens. It creates a Google sheet. So I have a list of all the late work if I wanted to spend time on it, but I don't. Interesting thing is most of the people are saying, I just submitted it, it was just late, and I'm telling you. In my eyes, I think this is great. They are learning accountability. Sure, it might have been better to turn it in on time, but the next best choice is for you to take responsibility for your lateness, to tell your supervisor about that, and to get it done. That's what most people are doing. But some of these people actually need support, and they need intense mental health support, they need housing or food support, and this is a way for me to get that information to them. So this works for me with my 50-person class. But again, that's just my values. You might have heard that and gone, no. Right? But that's fine. I'm not trying to sell you on that, because those are my values, and this is my context that helps me to make my choices. So my hope with all of this is not for you to come around to my way of doing things. I have zero interest in that. Instead, I want you to be really thoughtful and figure out what your authentic and sustainable way of doing things is, and really be able to kind of articulate that. Because then you'll start catching yourself. Just like I caught myself with my all caps in my syllabus. I went, wait, this isn't me. And so you can even after this day, go home, open up Canvas, open up syllabus, and say, what is the feeling that my students are going to get from these things, and do those align with my values? If not, you now know what to cut and what you need to add. All right? I just want you to be thinking, kind of using this decision-making thing that we had here, and that hopefully you realize now that you don't have to say yes to everything that sounds student-centered. Another wonderful quote, this is from an emergent strategist, Adrienne Marie Brown, and she says, when it comes up, the clicker's back there. So she says, your no makes the way for your yes. Boundaries create the container within which your yes is authentic. So if you have no boundaries and you say yes to everything, then what are you even about? But if you have things that you have very big no's to and can say why, then it becomes really clear and really joyful when you are living within that authentic container, when you are making those choices that are at the intersection of those three things. And so, so today you're going to go on, we got all the different toolboxes here. Maybe your toolbox is this one. Maybe it is the one that's lighting on fire and exploding. I don't know. Maybe it is the confetti one. But your task now is just to figure out what goes into it. That is your task moving forward. And hopefully, if you entered this day feeling like this, or you're thinking about what's going to happen in a week and a half from now, and you're feeling like this, you at least have a tool. You have a decision-making tool, so we can kind of turn this face into this face, right? Another one, and of course, this ice cream is going to be from the Aggie Creamery. Yes, right. Yeah, yeah. Let me tell you what else is in this PowerPoint, since you're going to have access to it. Let me jump forward. Yeah. So here, let me put this up here. If you want to engage with me, you can catch me during the conference, but also I am on social media and have a lot of these conversations publicly, so I'm happy to have those with you. You could email me. And then I also want to put this slide back up in case people wanted to get it immediately before Travis puts it on the website. As I said before, when you open this thing up, do not forget to look in the notes section of each slide. So I wouldn't even recommend that you look at it on presenter view, because anytime I have cited a study, that is in the notes. Anytime I've pulled something from the Chronicle, hyperlink down there. Anytime that I've showed you my syllabus, my forms, any of that, you can get right into it. And don't worry, they're all templates, so you can't mess them up. So for example, if you click into my Best Buy late work form, and you can fill it out as a student and be funny about it. It's not my actual one, so you're not messing anything up. The other thing that's in here is a bunch of other examples of my other values and things lined up, right? So I have other examples of the E's things, so this is just like a preview. If you want to go look, and you're welcome to email me about like, how do you use this, what do you use this? There's lots of links, but I have things to reduce grading time in here. Might be interesting. I have ways to create a student bill of rights if you're interested in shared power, and I have a student bill of rights with my students. If you're interested in ungrading and what my ungrading looks like, I wrote a paper about that, there, and there's also a link to my actual assignments. So any of that kind of stuff is in here if you want. I can't remember. Oh, and that's the last one. Alrighty, we are at time, but it was so great to speak with you all. I hope you will come up to me and talk to me. I'll be here for the rest of the day, but I'm so excited to be in a room full of people who care about empowerment, passion, critical thinking, empathy, connection. It's really great to share this time with you, so thank you.